From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
A solid jobs report pushes the unemployment rate to its lowest in 53 years as the Republican House of Representatives removes Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar from the Foreign Affairs Committee on a party line vote. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, editorial board member Mene Ukwe-Barua and columnist Kim Strassel. Welcome and happy Friday to you both. The Labor Department said Friday that in January, the U.S. economy added a net 517,000 jobs, which was a figure well above expectations. Big gains in leisure and hospitality, and also state government employment, with some smaller gains in construction, mining and logging, and services of all kinds. And the result of this is a 3.4% unemployment rate last month, the lowest level since May of 1969. And Mene, I'm wondering, what is your read of this economy as we sit here now that still looks, at least to me, somewhat strained?
Yeah, that's right. I think that the job numbers that were released this week will be befuddling to a lot of people on Wall Street, economists and others who have been betting on recession in the near term. You should put a pin in worries about a recession, which is to say nobody thinks that we're out of the woods yet. A lot of people are still betting that we're going to have one in the first half of this year and certainly by year end. That is what the economists project, and that also is what businesses are showing in their long-term projections. Employers who are adding jobs now in the short term to meet existing demand still think that it's very unlikely that they're going to either be raising wages significantly or expanding their workforce significantly in coming months. And so that's exactly the split that we have. Demand remains higher than anybody expected, given how far interest rates have been raised thus far. And that means there still is a lot of need for workers, which is why job openings are remaining near a record level and unemployment is very low. But if you look at some of the indicators that point to the long-term direction of the economy, like domestic investment and the housing market, it still seems as if the economy is headed to a big slowdown at some point within the coming months. And so it's definitely a positive sign that it continues to chug along. It might be an indicator that if a recession comes, it will be a little less severe than some people anticipated in the beginning. But I don't think that anybody really believes for sure that we can have a sign that recession isn't still coming.
Politically, though, this seems like it is great timing for President Biden because on his to-do list for next week is giving a State of the Union address to Congress. He had a short presser this morning to discuss these numbers and said, "I would argue the Biden economic plan is working." And Kim, I would take issue, I guess, with some of his claims. So he said, we created 12 million jobs since I took office. That means we've created more jobs in 2 years than any presidential term, than any time in 2 years, unquote. And I think there's a significant accident of timing there, which is if you take office and have your inauguration in the middle of a global pandemic crash, then yes, it looks pretty good 2 years later when there's recovery from that crash. But again, he said, we created 12 million jobs, and I'm skeptical of any politician on either side of the aisle who says we created those jobs. Biden was also asked if he takes any blame for inflation, and this is what he said.
Am I taking blame for inflation? No.
Why not?
Because it was already there when I got here, man. Remember what the economy was like when I got here? Jobs were hemorrhaging. Inflation was rising. We weren't manufacturing a damn thing here. We were in real economic difficulty. That's why I don't.
Kim, am I wrong to think that that is about a 10-second preview of a longer section of the speech that we'll be hearing next week in the State of the Union?
No, you're not wrong. Although that last comment also explains to us why nobody should actually listen to anything Joe Biden says about the economy. You're right, Kyle, that this particular jobs number will be the hook he will use. But as you can see from that statement, it doesn't really matter what the facts are. He'll always claim that he's done something amazing. This has been one of my complaints with this White House. Is previous presidencies would at least acknowledge that things were bad and ask questions about what might be done differently. This White House just chugs along regardless. Just a little correction there, as Joe Biden was saying that inflation was here when he got here into the office. It was 1.4% in January when he was inaugurated, and it stayed continually relatively low, right up until Democrats passed that next giant infusion of money into the economy, which is more in the spring, which was when it really started to take off. So, not entirely truthful there. I mean, Joe Biden's going to run on this as hard as he can, and he's going to go and address the nation. And he's probably also going to claim that the Inflation Reduction Act, hilariously named, of last fall somehow is playing a role in the fact that inflation numbers are creeping down. In reality, this is much more a reflection of the actions that the Federal Reserve has taken. But if I were the president, I wouldn't get too far out ahead of his skis just yet. There are a lot of indicators that do suggest there are some problems in the economy. Consumer spending is falling, manufacturing is down, business investment is down, the housing market has slumped. And as many people know, jobs numbers tend to be a long and lagging indicator in terms of economic signals. And we also have this just very odd situation where we've never really had the kind of economic disruption that we had that was brought about by a pandemic in particular. And I think you're seeing that feed through some of the numbers. The inflation numbers really still exist very much more in the services sector. And as you just noted, Kyle, that's where you're seeing some of the job growth. It's almost like there's still a pent up demand for some of this, but things are cooling a little bit when it comes to the purchase of goods, for instance. So I think that we just don't have a sense yet of where all of this is. And the White House could still have some rocky months ahead.
And inflation, it seems to me, is still looming over this economy. We had some recent numbers for the Employment Cost Index, and year over year, that is up 5.5%. And then checking the numbers again in the jobs report that was released this morning, wages up 4.4% year over year. That is slightly down from 4.8% in December. And yet, I think still higher than the Federal Reserve wants to see it if they're talking about trying to get to their 2% target. And I would point to a statement that Fed Chair Jerome Powell made last year. He said, "We want wages to go up strongly, but they've got to go up at a level that is consistent with 2% inflation over time," unquote. And so, Monet, what do you think that the Fed is thinking when it sees these huge job numbers today? I mean, do you think that they are privately perhaps a little bit relieved that this means they can probably carry on full steam ahead with these interest rate increases that they've been doing without getting the kind of pushback that they might get from particularly some people in the Elizabeth Warren wing of the Democratic Party if the economy were looking a little bit softer than it is?
Well, that definitely seems to be what the markets believe. Indices declined on Friday after the jobs report came out, and that's probably because investors are confident that Jerome Powell is going to interpret the lasting strength of the job market as a sign that he's able to continue a fairly rapid pace of interest rate increases and perhaps even increase rates to a higher terminal rate than he would have been able to if there were more immediate signs that the labor market was cooling very, very fast. And so it definitely does give political cover. And again, it's also an optimistic sign. People have been speculating about whether the decline in the labor market will be hard or soft. And it seems as if the longer it takes for a large round of layoffs to come through, for employers to really slow their hiring, the more credence it lends to those who have speculated that it is possible for the U.S. economy to avoid the worst while still getting inflation under control.
But I guess I agree with what Monet said a moment ago, Kim, that it looks to me like the economy is not out of the woods yet, and the Fed is not out of the woods yet. I mean, the famous phrase from Milton Friedman is that monetary policy works with long and variable lags. And he also likened a bad central banker to a fool in the shower who is constantly adjusting the knobs based on the water temperature that he's feeling at any given moment. And it seems to me that the Fed is still trying to thread the needle here as it tries to get to a soft landing, if I can mix about three metaphors there.
When you look at Jerome Powell, he very much comes across to me as a guy who has learned a hard lesson. It's never nice to be the head of the Federal Reserve that ends up with one of the worst cases of runaway inflation since essentially the 70s. And so it's not a great look. And I don't think he really wants to be in that situation again. So he comes across as a guy who is proceeding very cautiously here because And since I mentioned the 70s, we also, that decade offers a real warning because what you saw at that period of time was a Fed that would look like it was getting inflation under control and then take off the gas pedal and lower rates again, only to see the inflation come back again, leading to this great inflation of that time period because nobody ever seemed to really truly kick it. And so I think Powell understands the risks of that, of quitting too soon. I agree with you, Kyle. I think that these numbers in particular, even though wage growth is slowing some, it's still pretty strong. And so this is going to maybe give the Fed a little bit more cover to keep going. And that seems to be what it intends to do too, again, for all the reasons that they don't want to end up in a situation right back where they started again.